As our story begins, the riders of the King's Pyland training stables test the mettle of their racehorses over the open countryside of Dartmoor. But from a distance, a mysterious onlooker surveys the activity through a pair of old binoculars, his eye fixed on the majestic steed by the name of Silver Blaze. Silver Blaze was one of the initial stories that both producer Michael Cox and developer John Hawksworth had been eager to adapt. However, it was put aside numerous times for various reasons, and in his book, A Study in Celluloid, Michael Cox explained. John Hawksworth and I agreed that Silver Blaze presented problems, and we fought shy of it for 2 or 3 years. But eventually, John thought he could solve the problems. Too late, I realized that he was thinking of one set of problems, and I was thinking of another. My concern was the cost. In It's a Print, detective fiction from page to screen, Cox expounded. To Conan Doyle, the most exotic location, the biggest crowd scene, adds not a penny to the cost of ink and paper, but in a film, it's a major consideration. The horse race at the end, for instance, is not a necessary part of the story, but try to stop a director from showing it. He will say, "That is a natural climax. When the horse has been returned, when the mystery has been solved, you expect to see the horse win the race." And of course, he's right. There is an audience expectation there. In theory, the mystery would be just as compelling a mystery without the race, and it would be much more economical to do. Nevertheless, we went ahead and made a mental note that we would have to economize later. But we'll come back to that in a bit. Back at Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes has received an invitation to King's Pyland. As Watson reads the daily paper, he reveals that well-known racing personality Fitzroy Simpson has been arrested for the murder of John Straker, trainer of the now missing horse, Silver Blaze, which is owned and managed by a Colonel Ross.
Watson, I have made a blunder, which I am afraid is a more common occurrence than anyone would think who only knew me through your memoirs. But the fact is that I could not believe that so remarkable a horse as Silver Blaze could disappear, especially in the seclusion of somewhere like the north of Dartmoor. From hour to hour, I've expected to hear that the abducter was the murder of John Straker and the horse had been found, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
But I should be happy to go with you.
No, Tavistock.
If I should not be in the way.
Oh, my dear Watson, you would confer a great favor upon me by coming. I'm sure your time will not be misspent. The case promises to be absolutely unique. We can just catch our train from Paddington. But Watson, would you be so kind as to bring your field glasses? Ha!
On the train to Dartmoor, Holmes eyes his pocket watch as Watson reads his Pinkin and explains that the missing horse, Silver Blaze, is favored to win the Wessex Cup, and therefore an obvious target for those who might not wish to see the horse run at all. And of this sequence on board the train, Michael Cox recalled. Once on the train out of Paddington, Holmes performs his famous trick of calculating its speed with the help of his watch and a special knowledge of telegraph poles. Watson does not seem to be much impressed and appears to be filling in the crossword puzzle on the back of a newspaper. Of course, this could not be so because crosswords did not appear in the British press until the 1920s. Instead, John has taken a hint from Shoscombe Old Place and shown us Watson, the betting man, who is presumably calculating whether or not his wound pension will run to another wager. The fact that he is reading a sporting paper allows Watson to contribute to the exposition of the case. Instead of relying on Holmes to give a very lengthy sketch of events, for a film of the story, it is a much better method. Arriving in Dartmoor, they are met by Colonel Ross and Inspector Gregory of Scotland Yard, who explain that in addition to King's Pyland, there is a second training stables nearby called Mapleton, which is run by a Lord Backwater and managed by Silas Brown, a man with whom the deceased, Mr. Straker, had a bitter rivalry.
Inspector Gregory, are there any further developments as to the whereabouts of the horse?
Nothing at all. We have made very little progress in that direction.
I can't imagine how a horse like Silver Blaze could go missing for so long in a place like this.
Nor can I. I must tell you, Mr. Holmes, that at first I was not at all taken with Inspector Gregory's suggestion that you should be asked to come down here. Because I don't like amateurs, you see.
Huh. But you did send me a telegram, Colonel.
Well, no one else seems to be able to find my horse. If you ask me, it's these damned gypsies wandering all over the moor. It's a perfect scandal. I've said so for years.
My men have seen every group of gypsies on Dartmoor in the last 2 days, Colonel, and searched every stable yard, quarry and cave in South Devon. It's an absolute mystery.
Upon arrival, Holmes makes his way to interview the two principal witnesses, the maid, Edith Baxter, and the stable boy, Ned Hunter. And in passing, he encounters the stable dog, a protective hound who barks at the detective ferociously. Miss Baxter explains that on the night in question, she was on her way to deliver Ned's supper when she was approached in the dark by a strange man with a black and red scarf. Rejecting a bribe, she ran for her friends and the trespasser fled. But the mysterious man, Fitzroy Simpson, quickly reappeared, offering a similar bribe to Ned. But true to his employer, Ned loosed the dog on the intruder and gave chase.
The governor and the others came down soon enough. We found neither sight nor sound of the man.
One moment. When you let the dog out, did you leave the door open behind you?
Oh, excellent, Watson, excellent. It's just the point I was going to make.
I locked the door behind me, sir. I swear it.
Good lad.
This episode of the Granada series sports a fine roster of supporting players. Fitzroy Simpson was played here by Jonathan Coy, who has appeared in over 100 shows, including roles in Horatio Hornblower, Rumple of the Bailey, Downton Abbey, and The Bill. Conversely, the lovely Manda Jane Beard, who played Edith the maid, apparently only made one single acting appearance right here in Silver Blaze. And Ned Hunter, the stable boy, was portrayed by David John, who was actually 27 at the time and also appeared in Chariots of Fire, Doctor Who, Shock Treatment with Charles Gray and Betsy Brantley, and later became an accomplished voice actor, providing dialogue for numerous video games and films. Mr. John was also kind enough to speak with us recently, where he shared a number of wonderful stories about his time with Jeremy and the Granada team.
I'd seen the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes, which at the time I knew it was good, but I didn't know how good.
Yeah.
Again, bearing in mind that although it was already well known and it was already going well for him, he was a real kind of put his arm round you kind of actor. And I can remember that first scene where we're in the house and he comes in to interview us. And there was this kind of aura of like, here he comes, you know. And of course, like most of those actors of that generation, of that level, they'd come in and say, oh, hello, nice to meet you, you know, incredibly warm and polite and immediately kind of open to anything, put you at your ease. almost like a kind of classic management technique. He was the star. We knew he was the star, and he wanted us to be comfortable immediately.
Yeah.
He was one of those actors of that generation. I worked with a lot of them around that period. They were just so professional and so not just good in their performance, but good in their understanding of the industry, how it was then. That any pearls of wisdom that came out of their mouths, any advice that they gave, and that includes Jeremy, Edward Hardwick, Peter Barkworth, all those guys, they were so generous with it. It felt like the community was 100% supportive. And they just had that kind of passing it on to the next generation attitude.
Yeah.
And it was genuine, and it was they weren't being paid to teach you, but they were just passing it on.
So when you are forced to fall asleep next to your bowl of curried mutton...
I'll tell you what I remember about that scene. When that actress slapped me round the face to wake me up, it really hurt.
You don't flinch through it, though.
I couldn't. I was thinking, I can't flinch. And she was going...
She was really smacking you, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was the drugs, wasn't it? It was the opium or whatever it was, yeah. I'll tell you the other thing before I forget about Jeremy that I remember is Marmite. He used to sit there, and I saw him a couple of times spooning Marmite out of the jar and kind of eating. I'm thinking, that's really strange. And he said to me, you must eat Marmite. It's so good for you. It's full of vitamins and iron, and it's so healthy. But he used to carry a jar of Marmite everywhere he went. And if he was on set and needed a drink, he'd spoon the Marmite, hot water. There was a hot drink.
Wow.
That's funny.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never heard that before. That's really interesting.
Really lovely guy.
As Edith the maid tells her story, she states that Mrs. Straker woke the next morning to find her husband's bed empty, Ned drugged to unconsciousness, and Silver Blaze missing. Together, the group set out onto the moors in search of a clue. What they found was John Straker dead from a terrible blow, a blood-stained knife in one hand, and the scarf of Fitzroy Simpson in the other.
My theory is that Simpson was under some strong obligation to nobble or otherwise incapacitate this horse so that he would be unable to run in the Wessex Cup.
Clever move, that, putting opium in the boy's food, and easy enough through that window.
Yes. Then it was simple. He'd obtained a duplicate key, led out the horse. It was his bad luck that Straker was alert enough to catch him up on the moor. In the struggle, the horse bolted.
There's no proof that Simpson killed Straker, actually.
Well, the evidence against him is very strong. He was undoubtedly here that night on some devious business. He poisoned the stable lad. He had in his hand a heavy stick weighted with lead, and his scarf was found in the dead man's hand. And he went pale as death when I confronted him with that fact. I really think we have enough to go before a jury.
No. Inspector! A clever counsel would tear it all to rags. Has a duplicate key been found in his possession?
No.
But what chemist sold him the powdered opium? And above all, how could he, a stranger in this district, hide a horse? And such a horse as Silver Blaze?
I agree the evidence is circumstantial. But I think the net is drawn pretty tightly round Fitzroy Simpson. And I believe he is our man.
This week's intrepid Inspector Gregory was portrayed by English actor Malcom Storry. Born on January 13th, 1948, in Kingston upon Hull, East Yorkshire, Storry is yet another example of the tried-and-true British performer who trained in the theater but divides his time between the stage and the screen. He made his television debut in 1978 in Rumple of the Bailey and has enjoyed many recurring TV roles, most famously as Bill Adams in the British crime drama The Knock. In the theater, he is known for his portrayals of Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Prospero and Caliban in The Tempest, and Macduff and Banquo in Macbeth. But he is perhaps best remembered for his role in Rob Reiner's 1987 fairy tale, The Princess Bride, in which he played Yellen, the cowardly chief enforcer of Florin and the leader of Prince Humperdinck's army.
Give us the gate key.
I have no gate key.
Basic. Throw his arms off.
Oh, you mean this gate key?
In 2007, Storry got to flex his vocal cords a bit when he played the role of Gandalf in the original London production of The Lord of the Rings, the musical, where nightly he crooned the duet, A Lament for Moria.
Gone lost, mourn, despair, grief for the realm that once was there.
Malcom Storry is still very active today, having just wrapped on the new Amazon BBC One co-production, The English, starring Emily Blunt. He currently resides in Nottingham at the age of 74. Next, the trio move to the sitting room, where Holmes examines the items from the pockets of John Straker. Watson remarks that the small blade in his possession, a cataract knife, was a strange choice of weapon, as it is normally utilized for delicate operations. Holmes takes note of a receipt from a Madame Legurier of Bond Street, a milliner, addressed to William Derbyshire for a 22-guinea lady's dress. Inspector Gregory explains that Derbyshire was a friend of Straker and would sometimes forward his mail to the stables. Next, they move on to the scene of the crime, but on their way, they encounter a grieving Mrs. Straker.
Have you got them, Inspector? Is there any more news?
I'm afraid not, Mrs. Straker. But Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson have come down from London to help us. I assure you we are doing everything possible.
I wish you good luck, Mr. Holmes.
Well, thank you, madam. And our commiserations on your great loss. No, surely we met at a garden party in Plymouth some time ago.
No, sir. You are mistaken.
No, do you know, I could have sworn it. You wore a costume of dove-coloured silk with ostrich feather trimming.
I never had such a dress, sir.
That quite settles it. Thank you.
Mrs. Straker was played by veteran actress Sally Faulkner. Sally is perhaps best known for her work on the 1968 Invasion series of Doctor Who, where she played the character of Isabel. She also famously appeared in the 1974 erotic horror film Vampires. But of her time on the Granada series, she had many fond memories, which she recently shared with us.
And Jeremy was he was so sweet. And when I arrived in the hotel, the woman behind the desk said, "Oh, Jeremy's been waiting for you." He said, "LL, he wants his leading lady." Well, you know the size of the part, you know. So he'd always go, "LL, where's LL?" You know, he was just being leading lady. He was utterly, utterly delightful.
Yeah.
Peter Barkworth, who was in it, had been a teacher of mine at RADA, and he used to teach us technique. And he'd written a book on how to act, and he gave it to Jeremy while we were at dinner. He said, "Here, would you like to read my book?" Jeremy kept on leaving it all over the place. And said, "Jeremy, you..." I mean, Jeremy was so instinctive that actually there's nothing that Peter could have written that would have influenced Jeremy's work in any way at all.
Sure.
It was a rather sort of surreal moment, this very technical actor, very good actor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Offering this to Jeremy, who worked on a completely different level. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do remember also, funnily enough, I was somewhere up north, and there was a photography exhibition of people during the 30s, during the Great Depression. And people had written in the book, how marvellous to show this dreadful period in our lives, beautifully photographed. And then I saw this thing. He said, "Darlings, darlings, far too depressing. Come and see my show, which is on at the Theatre Royal." I thought that's
funny.
There was all this worthy comment. You know,
Yeah.
"Darlings, darlings, far too depressing."
At the scene of the crime, Holmes crawls on hand and knee, examining the fresh soil for clues overlooked by the police, and in doing so, unearths a half-burned wax vesta and a candle end, much to the astonishment of the inspector. Holmes and Watson soon take their leave of Gregory and set out across the moors. Gazing across the beauty of the lush green hills, Holmes formulates an hypothesis that the bolted Silver Blaze must have made his way to the nearby Mapleton stables. His theory is confirmed when they discover hoofprints matching those of Silver Blaze in the soil before them. Jeremy Brett's love of props is on full display in this scene, as he not only utilizes the horseshoe in hand, but his walking stick as well to help clarify the direction of the horse's travel across the moor. And to Linda Hawkins of the TV Times, he explained, "I would be lost without the cane. It almost seems like my compass at times. There is a moment in Silver Blaze, which was directed by the very talented Brian Mills, where Holmes is trying to work out the direction where the horse has gone. I use it as a directional point, like a compass. To have these lovely personal props helps me very much. It keeps the character sustained." Arriving at Mapleton Stables, they are met by a gruff stable manager named Silas Brown. Holmes confronts the man privately.
Early Tuesday morning, you were about the yard as usual, when you saw a horse on the moor. When you approached it, you realized that it wasn't a strange horse at all, but one that you knew very well. Your first instinct was to lead Silver Blaze back to King's Pyland, but then the devil put other ideas into your head. Here's a chance to make a great deal of money. It occurred to you that if you were to hide the horse,
you've been watching me, haven't you? You've been spying on me, son. Look, so I do what you want. If it's money you want, you shall have it.
you will do exactly as I tell you.
Making their way back to King's Pyland, Holmes requests Watson remain tight-lipped about their discoveries, as he is inclined to have a bit of amusement at the Colonel's expense.
I think I owe it to the public to remove Silver Blaze's name for the entrance for the Cup.
No, certainly not. Colonel, I should let the name stand.
But I've already withdrawn buyout.
But I have every hope that Silver Blaze will start on Saturday. Have your jockey in readiness.
Well, I'm very glad to have your opinion, sir.
That is a minor point, of course, compared with the question of who killed John Straker.
Doubtless you will be devoting yourself to that problem.
On the contrary, Dr. Watson and I are taking the night express to London. We've had the most charming little breath of your country air.
So you've despaired already of arresting the murderer of poor John Straker?
There are certain grave difficulties. Do you have a photograph of Straker? Thank you, Inspector. I am quite ready now for Tavistock. Linger.
I must say I'm rather disappointed in our London consultant. I don't see that we're any further than when he came.
But at least you have his assurance, Colonel, that your horse will run.
Oh, yes, I have his assurance. I should prefer to have the horse.
I think you should heed Mr. Holmes' advice, Colonel.
Well, I shall have to see.
The skeptical Colonel Ross is portrayed here by the impressive Peter Barkworth. Born Peter Wynne Barkworth on January 14, 1929, in Margate, Kent, as an actor of 5 years old, he claimed to have felt the sheer sensual pleasure of acting when he first appeared on a stage at his local church hall. Educated at Stockport School, he began taking part in concerts for the war effort at age 11 and enjoying the applause. His Stockport headmaster encouraged Peter to attend university, but having already played Hamlet and Macbeth at school, Peter applied for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts instead, where he was not only accepted, but awarded the Micklehill Scholarship. However, this only covered his tuition, so his father, earning £8 a week as a sales manager at a car dealership, gave up tobacco and alcohol and provided him with £2 15 shillings a week for his educational expenses. Barkworth would work hard to hone his craft over the next 20 years, and in the 1950s he began teaching acting technique at RADA. His pupils included Anthony Hopkins, Simon Ward, Michael Gambon, Diana Rigg, and Richard Wilson, who would play Duncan Ross in The Red-Headed League, just to name a few. Of his time as an instructor, he recalled, "Of all the jobs I ever had, teaching at RADA is the one I should least like to have missed." Soon after his time at the Academy, the roles came fast and furious for Mr. Barkworth, both on the stage and the screen. At the Haymarket, his favorite theater, he had his first leading part in London as Edward VIII in Royce Wrighton's abdication drama, Crown Matrimonial, a role which he would reprise on television a few years later, and for which he would win the first of 2 Best Actor BAFTAs. The next would come in Tom Stoppard's teleplay, Professional Foul, for the BBC4. Other notable roles included recurring appearances on The Avengers and Colditz, where he starred opposite Edward Hardwicke, but he is perhaps best remembered for playing banking executive Mark Telford in the TV series Telford's Change, which was watched every week by 7 million viewers in 1979. He also appeared in 2 episodes of The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes as Martin Hewitt, a working-class detective and contemporary of Sherlock Holmes. However, Doctor Who fans will most fondly remember Barkworth for his memorable portrayal as Leader Clint in the famous Ice Warriors season of that program. His list of film roles is no less impressive and includes appearances in 1970's Patton with George C. Scott and Stephen Fry's Oscar Wilde biopic in 1997. And, in addition to performing, he was also a well-regarded author, penning the acting handbook entitled About Acting, as well as the books More About Acting, The Complete About Acting, First Houses on Becoming an Actor, and For All Occasions, a selection of poems, prose, and party pieces. His books are often considered required reading for performers in training. In 1997, Barkworth retired from the stage and screen and devoted himself to world travel and gardening, even winning an award for his small garden at Hampstead, where he lived for 40 years. Peter Barkworth died on October 21, 2006, at London's Royal Free Hospital of bronchopneumonia, just 10 days after suffering a stroke. He was 77. Back at King's Pyland, Holmes questions Ned, the stable boy, once more, and discovers a strange epidemic of lameness among the sheep.
Inspector, I'd like to recommend to you the singular epidemic among the sheep.
You really consider that to be important?
Exceedingly so.
All right, Baines.
Is there any other point to which you wish to draw my attention, Mr. Holmes?
To the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime.
But the dog did nothing in the nighttime.
That is the curious incident.
4 days later, Holmes and Watson returned to Winchester for the Wessex Cup race, and an agitated Colonel Ross confronts the detective.
Where the devil is my horse, Holmes? No. Where the devil is he?
I suppose, Colonel, that you would recognize him if you saw him.
Know my own horse? You know, I've been on the turf for 20 years, and I've never been asked such a damn fool question before. I tried with no silver blaze, with a white star on his forehead and mottled hind leg. I suppose you realize that if my horse doesn't run, then quite apart from being lynched by the crowd, I shall be up before the stewards. Probably warned off every racecourse in England for life. Reputation ruined.
Let us hope it does not come to that, Colonel. Here's Dr. Watson. And this, Colonel, is your horse.
But that's not my horse, Holmes. Good God, man, what have you done?
Holmes takes a wet sponge from a nearby bucket and applies the water to the horse's forehead, revealing a distinguishing white mark, the silver blaze. The final sequence of events in the original story were somewhat troubling to writer John Hawksworth, as Michael Cox recalled in his book. John's primary concern about adapting Silver Blaze revolved around a fault in the horse racing background to which Conan Doyle himself confessed in his autobiography. In that book, Doyle wrote, "Sometimes I have got upon dangerous ground and taken risks through my own want of knowledge of the correct atmosphere. I have, for example, never been a racing man. Yet I ventured to write Silver Blaze, in which the mystery depends on the laws of training and racing. The story is all right, and Holmes may have been at the top of his form, but my ignorance cries aloud to heaven. I read an excellent and damaging criticism of the story in some sporting paper, written clearly by a man who did know, in which he explained the exact penalties which would have come upon everyone concerned if they had acted as I described. Half would have been in jail, and the other half warned off the turf forever." In an effort to rectify these shortcomings, Cardiff bookmaker David Parsons was brought in as a special advisor to the Granada team on racecourse etiquette. In addition to the more than 120 extras appearing as tic-tac men, bookmakers, race officials, stewards, jockeys, and spectators, the actual Banger-on-Dee racecourse was utilized to add authenticity, and it all made for a convincing and much more accurate depiction of the Wessex Cup of the 1890s. Michael Cox concluded, "John papered over the cracks and delivered a script as adroit as any he wrote for the series." As the starting shot nears, Sherlock Holmes places a bet of his own on Silver Blaze, and he and Watson take their place to watch the race. After a disappointing start, their horse rushes to the lead and takes the win. With congratulations all around, they lead the animals back to the pens, and the conversation continues.
Now, you've done me a great service by recovering my horse. You'd do me a greater still if you could lay your hands on the murderer of John Straker.
I've done so.
What? What's all this about if you've got him? Where is he then?
He's here.
Here? Where?
Someone who's in our presence at this very moment.
Yes, I quite recognize that I'm under obligations to Mr. Holmes, but this is either a very bad joke or an insult.
The real murderer, Colonel, is standing immediately behind you.
But the horse?
Yes, the horse. And it may lessen his guilt if I say that it was done entirely in self-defense. And that John Straker was a man quite unworthy of your trust.
Back at King's Pyland, Holmes explains the remainder of the mystery, including Straker's motive, a second wife and a double life that had placed him in financial straits, which Holmes confirmed when he visited the milliner, Madame Legurier of Bond Street, and showed her the photo of John Straker. The detective also explains the ingenious use of the curried mutton for Ned's dinner, the perfect dish for masking the taste of the powdered opium which put him to sleep. He also explains that the silence of the dog was telling, as the animal would have barked had it not known the intruder well. Sherlock Holmes is regularly seen smoking cigarettes throughout the Granada series, and this scene is no exception. But according to Edward Hardwicke, the reasons for this had little to do with the character and more to do with Jeremy's condition. To David Stewart Davies, he recalled, "Jeremy would often persuade directors that it was useful to smoke in certain scenes. Even when we were filming in National Trust properties, where normally smoking was forbidden, he was able to light up because, quote, "It was what Holmes would do." But according to Edward Hardwick, the constant smoking, at least 3 packs a day, was more about steadying Jeremy's increasingly fraying nerves.
This singular knife, which was found in the dead man's hand, and which no sane man would use as a weapon, right, Doctor?
Yes, only used in the most delicate operations.
It was used for a very delicate operation, that knife. As you know, Colonel, with your wide knowledge of turf matters, that it is possible to make a slight nick in the horse's tendon and do it subcutaneously. Any slight lameness will be put down to a strain in training or bruise, never foul play.
Villain, the damn scoundrel.
Not an operation to be done in the stable, no food for me. So sensitive a creature would arouse the soundest of sleepers.
Of course, that's why he needed the candle and struck the match.
Straker let out Silver Blaze into the hollow, where its light would not be visible from the yard. Simpson, in his flight, had dropped his scarf. Straker picked it up, with the idea, no doubt, that he might use it in securing the horse's leg. Straker was able to light his candle, but just as he had the knife ready, the horse lashed out and caught him a fatal blow on the forehead.
Why?
Well, animals have a strange instinct. They seem to know when some mischief is intended.
My final shot, I must confess, was a long one. It struck me that such an astute man as Straker would not undertake this tendon nicking without a little practice.
The sheep. Of course. Wonderful, my dear.
Now, you've explained all but one thing. The horse. Now, where was the horse?
Well, I think we must have a little amnesty in that direction, Colonel.
It bolted and was looked after by one of your neighbors.
Gentlemen, I give you a toast to Silver Blaze, coupled with the names of my friends, Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. To Silver Blaze.
Original air date on the ITV network was April 13th, 1988 at 9 p.m. Dramatized by John Hawksworth and directed by Brian Mills. Now, John Hawksworth we know quite well, and one would imagine that the department responsible for the title cards of Silver Blaze would know him equally as well. But sadly, his name is misspelled in the opening sequence of this episode. A simple typo, I am sure. Our next encounter with Mr. Hawksworth will come at the end of the season with the Bruce Partington plans. Director Brian Mills would helm 2 entries in the series, Silver Blaze and The Hound of the Baskervilles. Born Brian Arthur Mills on October 25, 1933, in Manchester, Mills was the son of a toolmaker. After giving up training as an accountant, he served in the Army, then landed a job delivering newspapers for the Daily Express in Manchester before a friend heard about work available in the sound department at Granada Television. Mills started by putting records on a turntable during the television company's early days and worked his way up to the head of the sound department. Determined to become a director, but without the qualifications, he continued to expand his knowledge by joining the lighting department and again, eventually taking charge of it. Mills began his directorial career in the late 60s and eventually helmed many episodes of television, including ITV Playhouse, The Cuckoo Waltz, Crib, and Crown Court, just to name a few. But he certainly made his biggest mark directing a nearly unimaginable 427 episodes of Coronation Street, beginning in 1968 and ending in the year 2000. And in fact, he was the only director to helm episodes of that famous soap opera in each of its first 5 decades. Mills would marry twice and was the father of 3 children. He passed away on June 3, 2006, at the age of 72. When the prospect of a second season of The Return originally presented itself in 1988, executive producer Michael Cox was determined to finally bring Silver Blaze to the screen in all of its glory, knowing full well that he would have to be incredibly economical with the rest of the season to keep within the budget. But while Cox was preparing for Silver Blaze, June Wyndham Davies had made plans of her own to shoot The Devil's Foot entirely on location in Cornwall, eclipsing the already modest spending that had taken place for Silver Blaze. This miscommunication was discovered far too late, and therefore was no choice but to proceed full ahead with both. The result, as we will come to see, would be a drastically reduced budget for the remainder of the season and crippling monetary restrictions on the second feature-length installment of the show. But with that, let's head over to the armchairs, where Luke awaits for a discussion of this fine show. A bright tale of a dog and a horse, and there's also a murder, of course, which involves an odd fact that the dog failed to act, which Holmes found of significant force. Well, we're back once more to talk about Silver Blaze. And I want to dive in, but first, I wanted to errata something from the last episode. I ended the Devil's Foot coverage by saying that we would be having a special music-related episode next. And, well, that didn't happen because other things came up, not the least of which was
David Burke.
Yeah. So that very special musical tribute episode is still in the works. However, we don't have an exact date yet. But, I mean, stay tuned for that. It's going to be fun when it does eventually materialize. But we have a different episode before us tonight, and that is Silver Blaze. So let's get to it.
Yeah. I mean, this has to be one of the classic stories. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a good, clean mystery. Technically 2 mysteries, Who Killed Straker and Where's the Horse? Some movie trivia for you. I don't know if you remember this or if it lodged into your brain or not the first time you saw this movie, but the story was sort of referenced in the 1996 Val Kilmer, Marlon Brando Island of Dr. Moreau. I think they actually possibly misquote the line of the curious incident of the dog in the night. But if you haven't seen that movie, I wouldn't watch it just for that quote.
Right. It's considered one of the worst movies ever made, which I think is it doesn't deserve that mantle.
It's harsh.
So my first note is about the shot of Holmes in his very smoky bedroom.
Yep, with his church warden.
Yeah, I like the high angle here, seeing all his messes and doodads around him. It feels soft, though, to me, a little bit soft focus. Is it just me? Maybe it's all the smoke.
Possible. I mean, I think it just had that kind of soft quality, maybe just because it was so wide. But it's nice. I always kind of wonder what the drawings are behind them. I can't ever make them out.
Yeah, one of these days, I always want to go back and just freeze frame like every episode, every painting, every drawing, every map on the wall and try to figure out what they all are.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do a relics kit of that someday.
Yeah.
But, well, I hate to have to do it, but right here at the start, we have what I think can only be called a bad note.
I wonder if it's the same one I have.
It probably is, but as Holmes delivers his line, "Watson, I've made a blunder," and he crosses to Watson and the camera moves, at the top of the frame, you can see the top of the set.
Yeah.
You can see where the set walls end.
Right.
And it's not just a frame or two. I mean, it's in full view as the camera moves. And I mean, you have to be looking at the top of the frame, but it's there. And that's pretty hard to forgive.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they kind of put some foam board up there because I think what they were doing is I think they were setting up that shot and working on the angle of the turn of the camera. And I think they assumed that little bit of foam board would block what we're seeing.
You're talking about the piece that's in the corner?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, to me, it's fascinating to see those things because when you see the corner, you're like, well, the corners filled in.
Yeah.
But then it just didn't fill in far enough to make a full ceiling.
Right.
And so the camera catches the edges of it.
I just wonder if it's one of those things that they prepped for, and then maybe on the day they turned a little more than they expected.
Yeah, the camera wasn't low enough or whatever.
But also, you have to remember, like, when TVs back in the day had like a border around them and stuff. So I don't know that you were ever getting the full frame of what they were shooting out of the camera. And I think maybe going back to the negatives and, getting the Blu-ray quality stuff, I think maybe you're seeing more than you would have seen on your TV.
Possibly. I mean, in theory, we're seeing a 4:3 image, which is what TV was.
True.
But at the same time, we often talk amongst ourselves about what if we could find the original film elements of this show. Maybe we could get a widescreen version of the show put out. But
Yeah.
little things like this are reasons why that, maybe could never happen, because they clearly were barely fitting into the edges of the frame that they had to work with what was usable.
Yeah, but I never get upset when I see these things because that's just filmmaking, It's like things are held together with Band-Aids and tape usually, so I kind of like seeing them.
I'll forgive it a lot in a lot of things, but I just feel like this is a prestige show and they shouldn't be showing the edges of the set.
Things happen.
But let's not let a bad camera angle spoil things.
Yeah.
Plenty of good to come.
I was glad to see Mrs. Hudson.
Yeah.
I mean, it was maybe the briefest inclusion of Rosalie Williams yet.
Mhm.
I mean, 2 short lines and then just kind of getting shouted at by Holmes on their way out. But it was nice.
Yeah. But there is a nice little moment where Holmes says, "Mrs. Hudson, we're off to Dartmoor." And then he twirls his jacket and it's a great Jeremy moment, but there's also a nice little musical flourish with the twirl, which is really nice. Nice touch.
Yeah. Speaking of the music in this scene,
Yeah.
I mean, when it goes into the train, it picks up a little bit, and then we're sitting in the train. And actually, one of the times I watched it through, I was listening on headphones, and the music kind of gets pretty ominous. Actually, like the bass. If you, I don't think if you hear it through the speakers or not, but it's like this something like that. It's like this real low.
It's like I'm train chugging. Yeah.
But it's a train chugging, but it's like it's kind of ominous feeling.
Yeah. No, the music in this episode, we'll come back to it, I think, because it does a lot of work.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of sequences in this episode that, frankly, if it weren't for the music, they would be a little long. Like walking across the moors for 5 minutes straight. It's like without the music going dun 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 dun. It'll be a little long.
It's true.
Another nice detail here about the train, though, they actually set up the telegraph poles along the train track. And, Holmes's line about that when he's looking at his watch, it's kind of a big deal amongst Sherlockians scrutinizing the text. I saw this episode before I ever read the story, and his bit about calculating the distance based on the telegraph poles, all that just kind of rolled past me as unimportant. But once I did read it and I knew what a big deal it really was nice to see those telegraph poles in the shot. And it really makes me wonder if those were erected for that shot or if telegraph poles still are extant, next to train tracks somewhere in England. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I was actually wondering on this one if they were on an actual train. And the reason I wonder that because there's a Paget illustration, which when you see it, in your mind, you go, they definitely recreated that on this episode, but they don't because they never cut to a wide.
Well, so I had a note about this that I was saving for book note time,
Okay.
But let's get to it now because
I just assumed they shot the whole thing with long lenses and they didn't have a wide or they just couldn't get far enough back from the window.
I think it's interesting that you say you see it in your mind's eye, but here's the thing. So when they did Speckled Band, Mike Grimes had created a fake train car that was on the side of a truck so that they could get wide shots like that and get them sitting across from each other. And as we know from our research back during the Speckled Band, that train car just didn't work out because there were no flat roads and it was just bumping all over the place. And so they used it for 1 or 2 episodes and then they discarded it.
Yeah.
And so from then on, they used real trains for the most part. But during that shoot for Speckled Band, they actually got a promotional photo of him doing that thing where he's pointing to his hand with David Burke sitting across from him. So they did capture that moment. And it is out there. It's like a behind-the-scenes promotional photo. I can't for the life of me remember what book it shows up in. We'll have to dig for it. But we'll find it, and we'll put it up as an artifact because, they captured the moment from Silver Blaze, but it's back in Speckled Band. And so I don't know if they decided, we just don't need to do it again. We've already sort of done that.
I mean, if they were in a real train car, it's likely that they just didn't have a lens wide enough to get the 2-shot. Because Holmes even crosses to sit next to Watson so that they're in a shot together, at least at one point. And I feel like that's probably wise because they just couldn't get far enough back.
Yeah. It does feel like a really missed opportunity given that it's such an iconic image. But like you said, unless they were going to shoot across the hallway or something, there was just probably no way they could do it with the camera.
Or on a set, basically. Yeah. So can we talk about hats for a second?
Yeah.
I mean, we got Holmes in his light gray deerstalker and the gray overcoat, which, again, going back to the illustrations, you can actually see in the overcoat that he's got the hood on in the illustrations, which he has on in this one. I just thought it was a really nice touch because it's kind of a weird jacket.
Yeah.
But it's there, it's like that much attention was paid to it, And then we got Watson in his dark gray or possibly plum bowler with his silver band. It's nice.
It is. And speaking of the hats, there is a note that I wanted to read from the Klinger book. And since we're kind of jumping around, I'll just read it.
Yeah.
So in the story, here's what Doyle writes about Holmes's hat. He says, "And so it happened that an hour or so later, I found myself in the corner of a first-class carriage, flying along en route for Exeter, while Sherlock Holmes, with his sharp, eager face framed in his ear-flapped traveling cap, dipped rapidly into the bundle of fresh papers which he had procured at Paddington." So the note that Klinger writes here is, this, and a reference to the Boscombe Valley mystery, to a close-fitting cloth cap, are the only references to the deerstalker in which Sidney Paget depicted Holmes, and which became his trademark. The Hound of the Baskervilles also refers to a cloth cap, but Paget depicted that one as a Homburg. So really, this story and Boscombe Valley Mystery are the only times they talk about a close-fitting cloth cap or an ear-flapping traveling cap, but never in the stories do they actually say deerstalker. So, that was a total interpolation from Sidney Paget. So interesting, but glad they kept to the Paget for this show.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the kind of thing, unless they specify, though, if you have to illustrate these things, I think you would just kind of go, well, what kind of hat's he wearing? It says he's wearing this, and it doesn't say what he's wearing in the next one, so I'll put him in the deerstalker again.
Right.
I think it's understandable.
Yeah.
I like when it changes, obviously. I like him in the Homburg, obviously, but no, it's good for variation. And I kind of like to feel that when he's out in the country, he's got a different hat on. It's kind of fun. It's just like going out in a different uniform.
Yeah, I like it.
I also like seeing the Pinkin, the sporting newspaper Watson's reading. It's just another nice touch.
Yeah, and it's actually not in the book that it's a Pinkin. It just says that Holmes has some papers. But I like that touch.
Yeah.
Well, then they arrive and are met by Colonel Ross and Inspector Gregory. And I have to give it to Brian Mills, the director, even though he will get some flack for Hound of the Baskervilles later, the shots of the countryside here are quite nice. And, I'm not sure it's what people think when they think of Dartmoor. I'm not from there. But there is a lot of landscape in this one, and it's all well shot, I think. But then there's a matte painting shot inserted to all of that of King's Pyland. And you can really tell it's either a matte painting or some post-production shot because the bottom half of the frame, which is just grass, is shaking, while the top half, which is the buildings in the distance and the skyline, is totally still.
Right.
Plus the wind is blowing the grass on the bottom, and the trees at the top aren't moving at all. And it's all forgivable.
But it's pretty subtle.
It's subtle. But then in the very next moment, we get another matte painting shot of Mapleton, which is frankly far worse because it doesn't even resemble realism. It's like a Bob Ross watercolor painting, and it also has the shakes, so it's doubly jarring. And it's just really interesting to me. I don't know how to say it other than these slips in quality here. Maybe they were done last, and by this point they were low on funds or something. They had to pinch pennies. I don't know. It's a sore mark for me on this one, though.
It's true. I think I'd give it a pass. I think not that we can just go, well, it was done in a certain time or whatever, but I don't think there would have been any way you could notice this on an old TV.
No, in the olden days, probably not.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that the trees aren't blowing at the top of the frame, but they are blowing at the bottom of the frame. But other than that...
Yeah, but they're really far away.
True.
And maybe the wind isn't over there. The thing I usually notice is actually that the film grain isn't moving.
Yeah.
That's usually the giveaway that I find first.
Yeah. The thing I'm most curious about is actually whether or not it's a matte shot, meaning like they actually had a piece of glass that day on set, or if it's like a composite shot they did in post.
I would assume it's a composite because again, there's no film grain moving.
Yeah, for sure.
But Peter Barkworth playing Colonel Ross, I thought he was just an absolute natural in that role. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but I think he's just completely convincing in this first scene.
No, he is great. And we've heard some stories, which maybe we'll come back to, but he was a character in real life.
I imagine.
Not completely dissimilar to the character he played.
He's a good thinker, though. He gets asked questions, and he does look, he thinks convincingly.
Yeah. Well, and there's a great Jeremy moment here, too, when his eyes, when Ross blows off the inspector's comments in the cart, and he kind of gives Gregory a look that's just like, between you and me, we get it, and it's just, it's pure Jeremy. It's great.
I think it's another moment of him kind of admiring someone else, or at least having a little bit of fun at their expense. One of the two.
For sure. Well, when they arrive at King's Pyland and they walk through the stables to the meeting with Edith Baxter and Ned Hunter, it's a really nice long shot of Holmes walking through, inspecting everything, no cuts. And it really makes that location feel real, which I'm sure it was real, but it's just really nice to see, like moving from one room to the other, from outside to the stables to the inside. It just gives you a real feeling of the location.
I think that's one of my main takeaways from this episode. I always look forward to this episode. It's not really one of my favorites, just kind of because of the subject matter. I don't know. But because they're actually in these locations, and it's not like even like Abbey Grange, like we talked about in our trip update video, where the house is kind of a composite of different houses.
Yeah.
This one just feels like we're in a little location and it's all taking place there. So it does feel very real. It feels like you're really there. It feels like you're really going through the mystery with him. And it feels genuine that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Did Holmes need to lick the dust off the window?
Well, I have a question about that, because it starts with another note I have, because I'm frankly actually quite confused about something in this episode. So in the maid's flashback sequence, I just don't understand what's happening. Edith serves the other two stable lads their dinner from the fire, Bill and Nobby, and then she puts Ned's on a tray. So it really looks like she prepared the bowls. And later she even says she made it herself and served it. But we know that's not what happened in the story. And so how do they explain the opium in the show if she actually prepared it all? In the story, it's the Strakers that decide to have the curried mutton, and then they have access to drug Ned's portion. But here, it's just strange how it plays out, because you literally see her taking it from the stove and putting it on the thing. But then, to your point, though, it's like one of the strangest choices, unless it's in the script this way, that Jeremy has made, is to run his finger along the edge of the window frame and then lick it. I feel like he must have been tasting for opium.
Yeah.
But by that point, like, there's so little data, though. It's almost like...
I think maybe what he's confirming is that the opium didn't come through the window.
Yeah.
Because when Ned gets up and he gets the dog, he runs out, and then presumably Straker comes in, steals the horse at that point, right? So I think maybe he came in with the opium is what the idea is.
There's an argument to be said, and I feel like somewhere, and I can't remember if it's in the story or the show, somebody says, like, it would have been easy to drug the stable lad's food through the window. But it's like, would it have been? I mean, you're going to like toss opium powder through the window and like not stir it up. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't make any sense.
I think the way they shot it was like the little window opened and you could have reached in and inserted in. And I think that was the MacGuffin, I guess, in this situation, is that Fitzroy Simpson saw the window open, so he had his opportunity to sneak in and stir it. But obviously, Straker planned the whole thing.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of like a lot of this is like a stroke of luck for Straker, because Fitzroy Simpson was there. It puts everyone on alert.
Yeah.
And then Straker sneaks in and does everything, drugs the kid, steals the horse, you know.
But it's just a weird thing, if that is what Sherlock Holmes is doing, if he's testing the windowsill for dropped opium powder, like it's just a bizarre, like why would you check there? Like why wouldn't you check like the countertop, or you know what I mean?
Well, because
like,
he's checking if it came through. Because I think he doesn't suspect Fitzroy Simpson, so he's going, this should not taste of opium. Lick, lick, lick. No opium.
I don't know. It seems like a really strange thing to me.
I mean, it would be strange because he would have to have been very sloppy. He would have like thrown it through the window.
And it's not in the story.
I know. It wasn't in the story. It's not really mentioned in the episode. I wonder if it was a Jeremy thing of him struggling with the same thing and going, I've got an idea here, and just did it.
It could be that, because I feel like there's quite a few instances in this episode where I think the director, Brian Mills, kind of let Jeremy do whatever he wanted.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a little too much sometimes, but we'll come back to that. So when Holmes grabs the hand of Edith Baxter to comfort her,
Yeah.
I mean, we're exactly what we were just talking about. I mean, what do we think of this? I've read a few commentators saying that Holmes would never have done this,
Mhm.
but I don't know. Is it just more Jeremy? I don't have the script for this one, so I don't know if it was in the script this way, but it definitely doesn't feel like something Holmes would do to me. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I agree. I don't think he would have done it. I think I've just seen this episode so many times, it always goes by me now.
Mhm.
But I thought, it's a pretty solid performance from the actress, from Amanda
Yeah.
Jane Beard.
Sure.
And it's very emotional. And frankly, she's kind of one of the only people in the whole episode that's this emotional about the murder.
Yeah.
And she's clearly distraught. And so maybe he's like, she's really going for it as an actress. I'm going to comfort her. I'm not sure.
Well, then also next we have Jeremy pulling that scarf across the stick.
Yeah.
Again, this feels like a Jeremy thing to me, man. Like it feels so much more of a Jeremy thing than a Sherlock thing, but it's also just a strange shot and a strange choice because he's really slowly pulling that scarf and the camera's pushing in on it and following it.
Yeah.
And then he rips it up and it rips up to Watson's face and then Watson has his line. Part of me is like, well, that was an interesting and different thing to try. Like that was interesting, but it's also, I don't know. It's just kind of odd.
I kind of feel again like maybe it's a little bit more misdirection.
Yeah.
Just to kind of try to confuse the audience even more, which I don't think was necessary. But it was clearly deliberate because, as you said, I mean, it's a kind of bizarre camera move. I mean, when you're doing these long single shots and then we just focus on a cane with a scarf being dragged over it, you go, something really important is happening here.
Well, I have a feeling probably what happened was they were like, okay, we do want to focus on that MacGuffin. We do need a shot of that scarf. And they were like, this is boring, people. Okay, Jeremy, just drag the scarf a little bit.
Jeremy, this one up a little bit, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a bit of the Chekhov's gun situation. If you're going to show it, it must have importance.
Right. If you're going to show a gun in scene 2, it better come back in scene 28 or whatnot.
Right. And if it's a red and black scarf, I mean, they even changed it from a cravat. So it's like, look at this scarf. This scarf means something.
And I think, Brian Mills, the director, he's doing a lot here. And I think he makes good use of the props and the locations. And I'm thinking now of the sequence where they open the small strong box of Straker's belongings and all three men kind of with their hands unload the box and place the items on the table. It's really nice for lovers of props especially. But also it feels like a mystery is being laid out for you, almost like a mystery board game is being presented.
Yeah.
And also, of course, I'm sure you're about to say the same thing, is the whole scene is one shot.
Yep.
Which I didn't even realize until this last viewing that there were no cuts in that entire sequence, which is amazing.
I would say I always enjoy this scene, even if it's, it's a little bit silly for anyone. If this is your first Holmes episode, it's like, okay, so we're just going to watch their hands lay all these things out. Like, it's a little strange. It's very well coordinated. Everything's kind of left perfectly set, but it's all set up for the camera.
Yeah.
It's not set up for them to look at either.
Right.
So it's kind of got like a Wes Anderson quality to it.
Yeah.
Or something of like a 40s movie. It's like its own relic set in just this scene.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like when they walk away and you see that Holmes has kind of placed the milliner's bill just so that the camera can see it in all its beauty, and then the camera just stops and lingers on the props for a minute. It reminds me of like those old like VHS games that they used to have where you could play like a game on your VHS machine and you had to like pause it to look at the clues and decide, who was the killer.
Yeah.
But all that aside though, I mean, it really is an impressive thing, and it's again, just I love seeing them perform.
Yeah.
Uncut, the camera moving from one to the other, everybody pulling off their parts perfectly. And I think it's maybe my favorite line of Malcom Storry, who's playing Inspector Gregory here, where he's like, you impressed me, Inspector. He's like, thank you.
Yeah. yeah. But speaking of that cataract knife that they hold up, I was trying to find one in that shape because I thought it was like a bizarre shape, like to remove cataract with that like diamond shaped blade. And I looked up a bunch of cataract knives from that time. I couldn't find one in that shape, but I did find a set of Vice & Co. London with an ivory handle even of cataract knives, and they're actually even more delicate than they make out in the show.
Yeah.
Because when Watson holds it up, he's holding it up in front of his face.
Right.
So you can kind of see it against his skin. And I think like maybe they went for even a fatter blade just so you could see it.
Yeah.
But the actual cataract knives were real they're like not quite needle-like, but they're real small. They're like little tiny scalpels.
Well, and I want to come back to that because I have a book note or two on the cataract knife. So we're going to come back to it when we get to the book notes.
All right.
I do have another question, though, and that is, what was that gold pen-shaped item with a chain hanging off it in the box?
They say that in the story. It's actually a silver pencil case.
Oh, okay. I missed that.
Yeah. So like back in the day, you'd have like a pencil that you would, sharpen, and then it would stick into one side and you open it and then.
Nice.
Yeah. I ran it back a few times and checked the book just to see if all the contents were there, and everything was there. I mean, they added like the corn merchant's bill, but other than like a few pound coins, I think everything was right out of the story.
That's great. My next note is a Jeremy note, which is just, him going, "Oh, Inspector, no, no, no." I always laugh when he says that. It's so great.
There is some interesting blocking in this episode, and I think that's a good example of like you seeing the policeman just like kind of kicking in the grass in the foreground.
Yeah.
But another thing I noticed is that there's a lot of what I would call Hitchcock blocking in this episode, where you have two people directly across from each other looking at each other, and then the third person is like further away from camera, right between their heads, and it kind of creates this little triangle. And Hitchcock did that a lot, and I'm starting to wonder if Brian Mills was a Hitchcock fan.
Yeah.
And that's why we have so many MacGuffins and this kind of blocking and things like that. But either way, I thought it was a nice touch. And it's the kind of thing that sticks out from other episodes.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of uniqueness in this episode. And again, like I don't always sit around watching these thinking, oh, that's the same guy who directed Hound of the Baskervilles, which we'll talk about when we get there, but it's not one of my favorite ones.
Right.
But this one, you can see why they thought he could handle Hound.
Yeah.
I think he brings a lot of creativity to it and a lot of skill, even though he really wasn't known for this kind of work. I mean, he was mainly a soap opera director. So,
well, chance to stretch your legs, So the scene of Jeremy in the mud.
Yeah.
Whenever I think of Silver Blaze, I think of this scene.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, that's what comes to mind when I think of this episode. It's Jeremy's dedication to the physicality of the role, even if it's not acrobatic or energetic or anything. But he just very happily lays down in the mud, starts rubbing his hands before he starts digging around. Like he's just really happy to do it and dive right in.
Yeah.
I mean, he finds a matchstick in the mud pile.
See, I feel like I'm starting to sound like the curmudgeonly old uncle, but I have to admit that while I totally agree with everything you just said, this one feels a little odd to me. And I think the reason is because it's almost like he's divining, it's almost like he's like mystically hovering his hands over the dirt, almost with his eyes closed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like looking like he's just magically finding things in the dirt. And I know part of that is just Jeremy being Jeremy. But I don't know. There's just something. It's almost like there's something slightly too
superhuman about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a little bit just because of Jeremy's performance. But I think the idea was that there was a match and I got stepped on by a horse.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't be sitting on top of the grass,
right?
But it would be visible. And I think he's just going, this is where it happened. It's going to be here somewhere. I'm just going to run my hands over it until I see it. And then he darts at it, and then there it is.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily like it was buried in the mud, because like one of them was a candle end.
Yeah, but they're pretty dang buried when he pulls them out.
It's true.
He's like he grabs an entire handful of earth and pulls it out and takes it out of his hand. But
I know what you mean. But I mean, we like him because he's a superhero.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of his like superhero powers, is that he can see things slightly down lower in the mud.
True enough.
So,
well, random hat note. I really like Inspector Gregory's hat.
Yeah.
It's different from most of the hats in the series, and I feel like it really fits his character well. And actually, I mean, the Paget drawing shows the character wearing a very similar hat. So, I mean, well done to the Granada hat department for being able to find that hat.
Yeah, I do like it on him, but I don't like the hat. It's I think they call it a low top hat or a coachman hat. It's actually almost the same exact hat Johnny Depp wears in Dead Man.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it fits him. It's brown. Like it just kind of fits his whole thing. He's got like a brown beard, brown hair, it works.
I just like the fact that everybody's not wearing the same hat.
Yeah.
It's just a nice change. I like it.
It feels a little bit more, I don't know if pedestrian is the right word, but like slightly lower class. Like he's sitting next to Holmes. Then he's sitting next to Colonel Ross, who's in a top hat, like a silk top hat.
Right.
And then he's got this like brown short top hat on. It's like he's just kind of on another level.
Working class guy.
Working class. Yeah, there you go. One thing I was going to comment on before we move on, though, was what actually Jeremy finds in the mud. Because they say it's a half-burned wax Vesta and a candle end, which I guess maybe this is perfectly obvious. I didn't know what a wax Vesta was. They called it a safety match, which has wax on the stem and a phosphorus end.
Yeah.
And it's actually one of the things that's in the box that when they're taking everything out of the box in the previous scene and they lay it out. That's another reason why Holmes would have known to look for it.
Oh, okay.
Because he's got a box of wax Vestas.
Yeah.
So it's again, Holmes is like, I was looking for it. So it makes it gives it a little bit more sense.
Yeah. You can actually get these on eBay. You can get like a little tin box of antique wax Vestas still intact for like $20 or $30 if you want a little antique collectible around your house. And also, for those who don't know, the inventor, William Newton, he named these matches after Vesta, the Roman goddess of fire and the hearth. So that's why they're called Vestas, wax Vestas.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Silas Brown.
Yes.
I really like Russell Hunter in this.
Me too.
I don't really know him from anything else, and I didn't really do a bio on him in the main breakdown, but this just feels like the kind of role he was born to play. I mean, I guess that's a sign of a good actor, but I just, his lines, "You've been watching me, haven't you? If it's money you want, you shall have it."
Yeah.
But I did look him up, and he was in tons of plays, of course, like everybody in the show, but he was in Hamlet with Ian McKellen back in 1971, but just a great character actor. Oh, and he was married to Caroline Blakiston, who David Burke mentioned in our interview with him, and who will soon appear in our series as the Dowager Duchess in Three Gables. So the connections never end.
Yeah.
He was also in a TV movie called Sherlock Holmes and the Masks of Death in 1984 with Peter Cushing in the lead, but also a great cast. I mean, this movie has John Mills, Ann Baxter, Ray Milland. It's directed by Roy Ward Baker, who did a lot of Hammer films. So I'm going to try and get a hold of this one, even though I rarely go in for the pastiches, but with a cast like that.
Yeah.
And also, Russell Hunter, he was the main character in a series called Callan, which is one of his biggest claims to fame, as well as a stint on Doctor Who. But actually, check this bit of trivia out from IMDb. Peter Jackson used much of Russell Hunter's unique look, mannerisms, and facial expressions in the CGI character of Sméagol Gollum in his Lord of the Rings trilogy.
That's interesting.
Yeah, Jackson actually remembered Hunter from the UK television series Callan, where his character Lonely was a low-life criminal informant. So that's pretty cool. I mean, and you can kind of see it, like the skin around his nose, very Gollum-like.
Yeah, and his eyes, big wide eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great performance all around. I mean, I like his affectation with the cudgel or his cane, whatever. There's a lot of good in this scene. Like, I really like the slow zoom in on Silas Brown.
Yeah.
He's like clutching his stick as Holmes is recounting the story.
Yeah.
And it's as if he's cornered and the world's moving in on him. It's like closing in on him. And I don't think he blinks the entire time.
Yeah.
It's just this great little moment.
And then Holmes takes his stick and goes, "You will do exactly as I tell you."
Yeah. Yeah. Just totally disarms him in every aspect.
Yeah.
My next note is just another mystery solved by a large sponge.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often.
No, and there's so much to say about this because, look, I don't claim to know much about horse racing, but when Holmes opens the stall to start washing the paint off Silver Blaze, he opens the door, and there's just a man standing there, already holding the horse.
Well, yeah, I think because they were all in on it.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that's what it is.
I mean, because Ned walks up with the water. I think he had arranged it.
Okay.
I'm assuming.
Well, it just feels a little odd because it's like the stall is so small that guy standing in there must have been like with his nose to the door until Holmes opened it.
It's possible that they were hoping that the horse would just be hanging out, and then maybe the horse was backing up. So they're like, well, we'll just put someone in there.
Yeah.
But I mean, they had him dressed right. At least he wasn't wearing like a Nike shirt.
No, he wasn't like a crew member, but it's just a little odd because he's, they're having this private conversation, and then he's like, "I'm going to reveal it now," and he opens the door, and there's just a man there.
It's true. I mean, I guess I just assumed it was like, we're all in on this, and we're gonna take Colonel Ross down a little bit, but
could be that. Well, and speaking of that horse, when Jeremy has to wash his face with the sponge, I feel like you can tell that was an issue.
Yeah.
Like that horse was not happy about the situation, and Jeremy knew it. And I almost felt a little worried for Jeremy as he did it, because it seemed a little unsafe, maybe, like he was trying to be very cautious and didn't do, he looked like he could have done a lot more cleaning, but he was like, I'm getting 2 strokes in and that's it, because I don't want to upset this horse anymore.
And it was also like they definitely used something very black to cover the white stuff on his face, because if you look at the sponge, he does do a couple of wipes, but then when they cut back to him, the sponge is like black. So I wondered if it was either really difficult to get off, or if, like you said, if maybe irritating the horse's eyes or something, and maybe that was problematic. But it's also kind of raises a different question. There's a drawing, one of the Paget illustrations, which actually shows up in the credits of Silver Blaze.
Yeah.
And it's just a horse with a very defined white stripe down the middle of its face.
Right.
And in the story, that's basically what it says.
Mm-hmm.
But in the episode, they change it to say, I think, a white star, which when you say that out loud, you go, well, the white star is easier to identify because it's more rare.
Right.
But why wouldn't they just use a horse with a white stripe? I wondered.
I think it is that reason. I think it's just that, frankly, it's going to be a lot harder to cover up that entire stripe with black paint and, make it look realistic. But also, it's just not distinctive.
It's not distinctive, but it is a famous horse. It's Silver Blaze. It's a famous story. It's, it was one of Doyle's favorites, I think, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
But then to just change it seemed a little drastic.
Yeah. I'm not sure, and I don't know who made that choice, so yeah, hard to say.
Yeah. I like that the show, I guess you have to say Doyle as well, but I like that the show itself takes the time to dedicate, like, to these various electives or specialty subjects, like horse racing, for example, where it's not only that the horse is the heart of the story, but there's an actual horse race.
Yeah.
But they even go to the extent of showing the jockey being weighed on the vintage weighing scales.
Yeah.
Like, just an excellent touch and like a great feat on the part of the props and costume department, just sourcing all that stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, the signage of all the bookies and everything. The details are amazing. And obviously Michael Cox and June Wyndham Davies, they get credit all the time, but I think John Hawksworth should get a lot of credit too, because just knowing what we know about how he went out of his way to kind of rework the story to be more realistic, where, to try and make up a little bit for what Doyle didn't know about horse racing. I think a lot of that is probably why that stuff is in there.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, for every great detail, there are always some missed opportunities. I don't know if you noticed this, but the background actors in this scene, when Holmes is explaining that Silver Blaze was the killer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The background actors just kind of stand there, seemingly like listening to Jeremy Brett's mystery-solving speech.
Yeah, I felt like when they arrive, obviously, everybody's cheering and applauding, and then the scene just kind of goes down, and then it's like they're oddly doing nothing.
Yeah.
But then I thought, like, maybe they're just waiting for the next race. Like, oh, yeah, we saw this horse. Big deal.
And I notice these things. We notice these things because we've been guilty of it in the past ourselves. When somebody's not watching what the background's doing, it can get missed. And I think that could just be what happened. Like, somebody said action, they got a couple of takes, and they're like, oops, who's directing the background? And it just nobody was. And so no way to know.
Sometimes you assume we're not seeing the background.
They're out of
We have a
focus.
shallower depth of field.
Yeah.
I think it's forgivable. I think we've seen this so many times that it's not hitting us over the head. So
I'll say this though, like the reason I feel like it's almost not forgivable is that the sound doesn't make up for it.
Right.
Like they could have had like the hustle and bustle of a crowd, but it's almost like all the sound drops out of the background too. Like everybody is literally listening to Sherlock Holmes solve the mystery, and it just doesn't seem like that's what would happen. He's talking to Colonel Ross and to Watson. He's not talking to the people standing behind him 10 feet.
True, but he was talking pretty loud.
True enough.
So maybe it's accurate.
Yeah.
I don't know. I had one other thing to point out, which you can reference the story on your own. The horses' names that are running in the race, they're all accurate except for the first one.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was a tasteful choice.
It was a bit racially insensitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they changed the name to the name of the owner.
Oh, that's cool.
Which I thought was clever.
Yeah, well done. Well, and speaking of audio things in this moment, I'm really wondering if you caught this. If you listen very closely to the audio in this moment, when Holmes is explaining that Silver Blaze is the killer, Right after he says the line, "It will lessen his guilt to know it was done entirely in self-defense."
Yeah.
If you listen very carefully in the headphones, it sounds like the horse is relieving himself off camera.
He just got away with murder.
And I don't mean a number one either.
Oh.
It's possible it could be something else, but if you really want the nitty-gritty, listen to that in the
That's
headphones.
pretty gritty.
Yeah.
Just got away with murder. You got to relax.
Yeah. Well, and here's a nitpick, but this one isn't mine. I saw this on IMDb Goofs, and I don't know if you read this, but here it comes.
Okay.
At the end of the race, a photographer photographs the winning horse and its owner using a camera of the era with a cloth hood. When the lens cap is removed, the subject of the photograph was required to stand perfectly still for several seconds while the camera collected enough light in order for the image to be sharp. However, the people in front of the camera continue to move chaotically, and the cameraman does nothing about it. The resulting photograph would have been nothing but an unintelligible blur.
Yeah.
So probably true. And, it's, I guess, who cares? But it's just kind of funny because the next thing we see when we cut back to the dinner table scene is a nice picture of them.
A different picture, though.
Totally different picture. Yeah.
That's why, because the photographer is like, you guys are all idiots. You're supposed to stand still.
Yeah.
They just couldn't leave that in because they're just like, this is just getting way too into details of photography for this episode. We're cutting this scene.
They're like, this is going to end up on IMDb Goofs in 40 years. We're getting rid of that.
We're getting rid of it.
Yeah.
So we go back to the house. I think we could call the entire scene at the dinner table the Jeremy pile.
Absolutely.
Because it's just everything in this scene could just be a Jeremy note.
Mhm.
I mean, my first one was Jeremy's eyes when Colonel Ross rings the dinner bell.
Yeah.
It just pulls him out of his relaxation, but his eyes make their way to the bell, and then his hand mutes it, and then his eyes move up to Ross.
Yeah.
It just kind of admonishing him in that moment.
But what's even great about that is that they gave Ross a reaction shot.
Yeah.
And he's just so oblivious. He's so oblivious to the fact that Sherlock is annoyed.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's such a great little interplay. It's so great.
Yeah. Like, why aren't you just answering me?
The thing I love most about this entire sequence is the props.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just, I mean, oh my God, it's so many props. I mean, Jeremy's playing with the knife and then the apple and then the photo of Straker. And then he's smoking in close up with that cigarette right up to his face. And then he gets a new cigarette out of his cigarette case. It's like he's never not doing something with his hands.
Yeah.
He's always busy. And it's, again, we say this all the time, and I'm sure we said it too much at this point, but it's like so many actors would just blow that. They wouldn't be able to hold an entire scene going back and forth between 7 or 8 props.
Yeah.
And Jeremy does it with such finesse. My God, it's just like a joy to watch. It's like watching ballet. It's amazing.
I got to say something about that too, though. The scene where he gets up to demonstrate the cataract knife and he's leaving the table, he lets the knife trail behind him as he exits frame.
Mm-hmm.
But then he comes back and he's holding the knife and an apple in his left hand, really, quite deftly. But then he has to pass it over to his right hand. And you can kind of see the exchange between right and left hand and the fact that, Jeremy was left-handed.
Yeah.
And so it kind of goes one by one over to the other hand so that he can readjust to perform the surgery with his right hand.
Yeah.
But just an interesting little tidbit to look out for. But yeah, I love all the hand acting in that scene.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this whole scene, it's, again, I don't know who to give credit to. Partially Jeremy, I guess partially Brian Mills. But it's like, frankly, this scene could be a crashing bore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a lot of footage around a table, and there's nothing going on except for Jeremy and his performance selling the whole thing and his work with the props. I mean, there is a little bit of busyness going on with these servants serving everybody soup and, doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But there's only 1 or 2 little flashback moments in this entire thing. The rest of it is literally just exposition. It's just explanatory dialogue.
Yeah, but you have to hand it to Peter Barkworth too. I mean, because he's committed to his role as well. And
that's what I mean, though. In the hands of lesser actors, a boring scene around a table that lasts 10 minutes would have been unwatchable. And this is somehow maybe the best part of the entire episode.
Exactly, yeah. And in the story, it takes place on a train.
Right.
So it's the fact that they've even made it more pedestrian in a way, to put it around a dinner table, it's like, it's just great. It's just the fact that they pull it off.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's amazing.
Jeremy, bleeding like a sheep,
Mm-hmm.
and Watson's subsequent, very genuinely surprised reaction to it, I think.
Yeah.
But then his big smile, like it's really sweet and not in the story,
Mm-hmm.
but it just works. It's just like a perfect little end to the scene.
Well, and speaking of who's around the table, I mean, we mentioned Peter Barkworth so many times, and we keep saying it, but I mean, he brings a lot to this one. To me, he's one of the things that elevates this episode.
Yeah.
And I feel like his performance is it's small. You know what I mean? It's not huge. He doesn't have a big part. He's not gregarious, so to speak. He's just part of the episode, but it's a unique character that is frankly unlike anybody we're going to see in the series again. So it's well done.
It adds a bit of richness in kind of both sense of the word. He does come across as genuinely like too rich to have manners.
Yeah.
And but not, like you said, not gregariously either. But yeah, it's just a good new color to the series.
Yeah. So the final toast shot, ding, ding, ding of the glasses. Quite familiar since it's basically a redo of the shot, including the exact same music and sound effect cue from The Empty House.
Yeah.
When Holmes comes back and they toast with Mrs. Hudson on Baker Street. Well, let's talk about the books for a moment.
Yeah.
Silver Blaze was published in the Strand magazine in December 1892 and in the New York Strand in January of 93, and it was part of the memoirs cycle.
I actually listened to the Edward Hardwicke version of the story this time, the audiobook.
Oh, nice.
His Holmes is completely different from Jeremy Brett, if you haven't heard them.
Yeah.
But also, he says Bayard instead of Bayard, which I thought, just interesting because he's been in the show and that's how they pronounce it. So I think he was like, nope, it's Bayard. We're changing that.
Right.
And there's actually a couple of lines cut out. I know there are a couple of versions of the story, and I think at one point Mapleton changed to Capleton or the other way around.
Yeah.
There's a couple little things, but yeah, just curious.
And we should say those audiobooks are available on our Patreon page if anybody wants to hear them. But just in terms of what you just said about the fact that there are different versions, it always strikes me as strange when I go online and I'm trying to like do a quick search, and so I'll pull up a version online of the full text of one of these stories.
Yeah.
And it's, there are the American versions and the British versions, and they are different. And there are things like that are kind of telltale signs, like Mapleton being a different name. But I find that almost always, with almost no exceptions, maybe there's one exception somewhere, but they always use the British version when they made the shows.
In this show, yeah.
Almost never the American changes are in there.
That's interesting to know, yeah.
Yeah. Well, a big nitpick among Sherlockians is the deal with the calculation that Holmes does on the train being a simple one.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to read a small bit from the Klinger book here again, and this is from the appendix entitled "The Calculation is a Simple One." Klinger writes, J. Finley Christ in Sherlock Pulls a Fast One concludes that the calculation was not a simple one. Guy Warwick in Sherlock Holmes and Music concurs, maintaining that a speed of 53.5 miles per hour would have required Holmes counting 2.2439 seconds between passing poles and then figuring out a complex fraction in his head. The only conclusion to be drawn, Warwick believes, is that Holmes's precise statement was a sheer bluff, which took Watson in at the time and Watson's readers ever since. So, I mean, it's, again, if you do the math, yeah, he has to have been counting at 2.2439 seconds.
Yeah,
each time.
Yes, I don't know.
I just find these notes entertaining, and to me, I just like to know that there are folks out there as obsessed as we are, even if it's with totally different minutia. At least they're obsessed.
Yeah, it's true. I would say I think you have to give it to Jeremy, because in that moment when he says it, the calculation's a simple one. He kind of gives Watson a little cheeky glance.
Yeah.
So I feel like it almost excuses it, even if it's like they're saying, even if it's crazy, difficult. I think he's got something up his sleeve there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of calculations, though, the milliner's bill. We've done this before. We've talked about old money versus today's money.
Mm-hmm.
According to the website I referenced, £37 back then, which was the total bill, would be about $5,100 today.
Wow.
So that's an expensive bill.
Yeah.
So when they say 22 guinea dress, that's like a $3,000 dress.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, there is some interpretation in those numbers, but when we talked about Violet Hunter's wages or The Man with the Twisted Lips, Gentleman's Wages, it's in that same ballpark. So it's a lot of money.
Yeah, for sure. Well, another difference between the show and the book is that in the book, Holmes doesn't wash Silver Blaze with soapy water. In fact, he actually doesn't reveal the blaze at all. He just tells Ross to wash his face when he gets home with, quote, spirits of wine. And Klinger in his book clarifies what that means. And spirits of wine is just another way of saying brandy. So once again, brandy to the rescue.
Brandy's good for everything.
Yeah. One other big controversy among the scholars is whether or not Holmes rigged the race by keeping the mystery of Silver Blaze up for so long and betting on what everyone assumed was an absent horse so that he could make a bundle of money. To be honest, I find these entries a bit tedious, but if anyone is interested, there is an entire appendix devoted to this in the Klinger book, right next to the appendix, nitpicking the telegraph pole calculations. But the thing about it I thought was interesting was that even though John Hawksworth went out of his way to correct so many of the racing issues for the show, they left in the Holmes betting bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's fine anyway, but it's just funny that they chose to double down on that controversial bit because,
right.
To be honest, they could have just changed it to Watson betting.
Well, but they changed it, though. They changed it around the order, though, didn't they? Because they washed the face of the horse before the race.
Yeah.
But I think in the story, it's after.
Yeah, and it's totally different because in the story, he's entered as Silver Blaze, but they haven't washed him yet. And so he's... even Ross is confused as to what's even happening. And somehow Sherlock had the power to enter the horse without Ross's permission. And there's a whole bunch of weirdness around it.
Yeah.
And again, Doyle, which we've talked about, he didn't know horse racing very well. But
see, that brings me to an annotation I actually like. And I'll just read a part of it. So this is from Doyle's autobiography. And I'll just read the very end of it because I think it explains a lot of different things.
Yeah.
He says, I have never been nervous about details, and one must be masterful sometimes. And I think that explains so many things about Doyle and about these stories and about the things people criticize Watson over. It's the difference between a tactician and an artist. And I'd prefer the story by an artist.
Yeah, of course. So we were talking about the cataract knife before, and there's a couple interesting notes that I have here. But really, what I wanted to do is give a little bit of backstory on Doyle because from 1876 to 1881, he studied standard medicine at the University of Edinburgh Medical School, and then he got jobs as a doctor on whaling ships and other places before setting up his own practice. But in early 1891, he went to Vienna to begin studying ophthalmology, and he had previously studied at the Portsmouth Eye Hospital, but just to get the ability to perform eye tests and prescribe glasses. But Vienna had been suggested to him by a friend as a place to spend 6 months and train to be an eye surgeon. But Doyle actually found it too difficult because all the medical classes were being taught in German and his German wasn't very good. And so he abandoned all his studies there. But I mean, that's likely where he got the inspiration for and the knowledge about the cataract knives.
Yeah.
Although there is a note in the Klinger book that kind of disputes this entire idea. And here's what Klinger writes. The researches of Roland Hammond, MD, convince him that a cataract knife could not possibly inflict such an injury because a horse's tendon would be too tough for a small knife to make a sufficient penetration. Quote, the incident has great dramatic value, Hammond concludes, but the thrilling scene depicted in Silver Blaze does not stand up to the cold light of reason and experience. So yeah, I mean, that's that kind of speaks to what you were saying about how the blades that were for cataracts were actually really, really thin. And, it'd be like trying to cut like a steak with that. It'd probably bend the knife before it would.
Well, see, now that you bring up two things now, because scalpels are very, very thin.
Yeah.
But they're very hard. And so you can get them very sharp. You could cut a steak with a scalpel.
Well, I guess we'd have to see a real cataract knife to make the call.
Maybe if we saw a cataract knife from that time and they were extremely blunt or thick, maybe you could say that. What Jeremy does with the apple is aggressive, let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it necessarily depicts exactly what they were trying to aim at with the story. What Doyle says in the story is that if you just were to nick the tendon, it would be something that would go unnoticed.
Right. It's not like he was trying to like slice the tendon for, all the way off, or he was just trying to injure the horse a little bit.
If you had a scalpel, I mean, I've cut, pieces of aluminum. I've at least scored aluminum with a scalpel and to be able to break it. So like, I would push back on that one.
Yeah.
But secondly, where did Straker get a cataract knife? Like, I mean, what a weird thing for him to have by his bedside.
Yeah, I don't remember if it's ever explained in the story, but maybe the guys at iHose could school us on that one.
Yeah.
Well, there's another funny annotation in the Klinger regarding the candle end and the wax vesta. Klinger writes, "It is odd indeed that an experienced trainer would approach an untied horse from behind and then light a match. Alexander Moore Hobb notes that Straker could have prevented the horse from kicking by holding down his tail, but his hands were full with the cravat and the knife. In which hand did he hold the match? And it was raining." Hobbs muses, "It's a wonder he even got a match, Vesta, to light." Though I did pay attention to how they tried to do this in the episode, and frankly, they just don't. It's a series of cuts in the retelling, and by the time they get to the nick in the tendon, he's not holding anything. He's not holding the candle or the match or the scarf or anything. It's kind of like he's just got the knife in his hand. So, and the candle, I mean, it could have been on the ground, I guess, but it's kind of doubtful it would have helped do delicate surgery if it's...
No, it's true. I mean, it's extraordinary. It has to be extraordinary for it to be a story, So, I mean, if he would have walked out in the night and was so skilled that he could do it in the dark, then we wouldn't have a story.
Yeah.
So he had to light a match. He had to light a candle. He had to have the thing to hold it up. And he had to have the thing. And then the horse had to kick. So it's like, you wouldn't have a story without it. So
it's fun. That's all that matters in the end.
Yeah.
But overall, though, I mean, this episode actually is very close to the original story.
Yeah.
Which, John Hawksworth is almost always good for. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything we missed? Good, bad, or Jeremy moments? I've hit pretty much all of mine, but is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, let's say good. I have a good continuity thing. In the close-up of the dead body of Mr. Straker, you can actually see the little cataract knife in his hand.
Oh, really?
Good bit of continuity, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, one overall good note that I have is just a nod to the cinematographer, Ray Good, because I just feel like, in spite of some flaws, there is a lot of great photography in this episode.
Yeah.
And it's stuff that people might not notice, but just like the night shots of King's Pylon, they're all lit really well. The landscapes, obviously, the location footage, but like the close-ups on things where like Holmes is revealing Silver Blaze, the close-up on Holmes's face. It's just really nice stuff. Really like a step above in my view. So hats off to Ray Good.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, it's time for the vote. Luke, what do you got?
I really like this episode. I can't say that I always look forward to it, but I like it. I think it's a classic. It's just not in my favorite list, I would say. At least not in my top 5 or top 10. But I'm going to just give it a 9, and I'm just going to leave it there. And I don't know where that falls with my other ratings, but it feels like a 9 to me.
Yeah. I like Silver Blaze. I do. And I think we're still in the top tier episodes. Things haven't started to decline in terms of quality, really, in terms of Jeremy's health, any of these things. But to be honest, I can't put my finger on why, but this one has never really been at the top of my list. I mean, there's a ton of good about it. And I think it's probably just because it's not actually very exciting.
Yeah.
There really aren't any moments where your pulse quickens. The inspector, he's a bit dry, which is fine. And Silas Brown is a nice splash of color in the middle. Colonel Ross, he's fun. And it's Holmes at his best, make no mistake. I mean, I actually really do like the mystery.
That's the great thing, is that it is a really good mystery.
Yeah.
I mean, even Doyle said he bet his wife that she couldn't figure out who the killer was.
But that's funny, though, because I think the reason it is a good mystery is because I think an astute viewer could actually solve it.
Yeah.
I think if you look at the evidence, how it's presented, you could. I mean, I think you could make the leap. And I've always liked that. The bad stuff in this one, it is really minimal. I mean, those terrible composite shots stand out like a sore thumb to me. But I mean, again, watching it in HD, and we've just seen it so many times. But overall, when I'm trying to think of a number, I found myself thinking of our previous conversations and how you said a great episode starts at a 9.
Yeah.
I do think it qualifies, but I think I would only put it slightly over. So I'm going to call it a 9.1.
I think that's fair.
I watched it a few times in preparation for this, and I can't deny that I enjoyed it every time.
Yeah.
But I didn't find my appreciation increasing, if you know what I mean.
I think that's it. I think you nailed it, is that a lot of these, I mean, especially for me, Six Napoleons, my appreciation increases every time I watch it because like I'm finding more or I'm learning something more about behind the scenes.
Right.
And in this one, it's just where it's always been. Like I like it. I like it a lot. I just don't love it as much as others.
I gotcha. All right, well, the time has come for a little of Mrs. Hudson's housekeeping. I don't know what to start with, but let's start with our movie, The Vast Lonesome. Just very briefly, we've been making great progress on it. We've been doing some test shooting, effects testing, locations are all secured, et cetera, et cetera. Things are really coming together, and so we're just really excited to roll cameras on this very soon. If you haven't seen our little 3-minute video on the topic, it's on our Twitter, and we just added it to Facebook too. And since our last update, we've had a few more fantastic listeners join our cause. So just a brief shout out to Derek, Rob, and Kat for coming on board. You guys are amazing. Along with our first group of listener supporters, Joey, Tom, and Rick, you're really helping us to make a dream come true here. And we're just so close to our goal now. But we're still hoping to find just a couple more supporters. And, you know, just to put all the cards on the table, because we have been asked, our film is a SAG film, Screen Actors Guild, and the full budget is $500,000, and we're down to the final $100,000 that we need to start shooting. And that might sound like a modest amount, and I guess it is, but I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but we also own a production company, and we're bringing more than twice that to the movie as in-kind support. So this film is going to look and feel like a movie 3 times its budget at least, and that's to say nothing of the incredible locations where we'll be shooting. We're going to be shooting in the same places where they shot Tombstone and Quick and the Dead and Monument Valley, and just to name a couple. So at this point, we're really just looking for a couple more equity investors to help us bring it across the finish line. It's a standard PPM agreement where investors get paid back first, plus a premium, but we also have a tax-deductible fiscal sponsorship now, so anyone who would like to support the arts can come in at any level, really. And we have all kinds of perks for anyone who would like to contribute. I don't want to go into all that here, but we're just so close now. And if we can just find a handful more folks who'd like to get involved, we'll be rolling cameras this winter. So if anyone out there would like to know more, please drop us a line at contact@sherlockpodcast.com, and we'll send you over our investor/donor deck, or you can visit us at vastlonesome.com for more info.
I think it's also worth saying that this is kind of the way we've been making films in the past. You know, we just did a film with Werner Herzog, which was, again, just very in line with the way we work, you know, keeping things small,
right?
Keeping the budget low. But our first documentary, The Unbelievers, did go to #1 spot in iTunes documentaries. And also our sci-fi movie, Intersect, also hit #1 in horror on iTunes and even Hulu and a couple other places. So this is the kind of thing that's in our wheelhouse. This is what we're trying to do.
Exactly. We're bringing all that experience to bear on The Vast Lonesome. And Luke and I mean, we just firmly believe this is the movie that's going to really put us on the map as filmmakers. So if anyone out there would like to see us succeed, would like to support the arts, and would like to join us on this great adventure, we'd love to talk with you. Okay, well, I think the next big announcement has to be that the long-awaited Sherlockian Relics Vol.2 is finally available for pre-order. And what a collection it is. Luke, why don't you give us the lowdown on which items are going to be included in this kit?
Yeah, we've been kind of teasing this for so long, and I think we should explain. I mean, the reason this has taken so long is just we're trying to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to release this thing before it's ready, and we are now at that point.
Yeah.
So let me tell you what's involved. So I think the gem of the entire collection is going to be the Napoleon bust. It is going to be solid plaster, and there will be a black pearl of the Borgias hidden in the base of each one, you know, just before they're fully hardened.
Yeah.
Each bust is going to come in a custom-made Gelder & Co. box meant to mimic the shipping boxes that are in the background of Gelder's workshop in the episode. We are very, very pleased with the result of the Napoleons, and we think you will be too.
Yeah.
It was a long process to reproduce these.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, we have received, as you guys probably know, pictures from different listeners who have in their collection the original busts. And a number of these listeners have been so generous with us, and they've taken, you know, dozens of pictures, you know, hundreds of pictures of these things from all different angles so that we could put them into the computer and recreate a 3D model.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, Luke has the original, or at least what we believe is one of the original pieces that the show prop was based on. So putting all that into the computer and, having the computer and it's not just the computer, it's Luke's skill as a 3D artist as well, but, have it put out what is the closest possible thing that we can recreate in terms of the face of the Napoleon, the shape, the size, everything about it. So there's never going to be another prop that is this close to what was in the show.
There's some variation.
Right. Well, there's different ones.
Right.
Like the ones in the show are not all the same.
Right.
Yeah. And even the ones we got pictures of from listeners, they don't look the same.
They look different. Yeah. And depending on what lens you use, he looks fatter, he looks thinner, he looks taller.
But we spend a lot of time figuring out what is the best middle ground for all the little details, all the little nuances. And when you see it, there is no mistaking it for the one in the show. It looks exactly like it. So it's pretty exciting.
We think you'll be happy with it.
Yeah.
Moving on from the Napoleon bust, we have the Irene Adler photo frame.
Mm-hmm.
And what this is actually what they call a travel picture frame. This was a Victorian era item where a photo was printed and put in these protective kind of clamshell cases for you to travel with, because you'd only have one copy of this photo.
Mm-hmm.
The photo itself is printed in a way that it's meant to mimic the old cabinet card style photos.
Yeah, I mean, it's when Holmes opens his drawer and sees the photo, that's exactly what you're going to see when you open your drawer and you see the photo, because it's a very similar frame. It's a high resolution photograph. It's a really nice little addition to any collection.
Then we have the Persian slipper, or what is traditionally called a kasa. These are being handmade in Pakistan, which is basically modern-day Persia, to look as close to the prop on the show as possible. So you can hold your favorite tobacco in elegant hand-embroidered style, complete with a toe curl, the pull tab on the back of the heel, and all the gold stitching.
Mm-hmm.
It will be magnificent.
Actually, we've probably received more emails asking us why we didn't include a Persian slipper in the first Relics kit than any other item. So we're giving the people what they want, and, it's going to be in this one. It's going to be great.
Really happy to include it. And I mean, this was way trickier to reproduce than we can even say.
And there's actually quite a story behind the creation of these Persian slippers, which we'll save for another day. But let's just say there's a reason why it's taken this long to get Persian slippers from Pakistan.
Yep.
And you can probably imagine how difficult that's been.
Lastly, we are going to include the Death of Sherlock note. This is the handwritten note that Holmes leaves for Watson on the top of Reichenbach Falls right before he meets his doom.
We actually screen captured every example of Jeremy Brett's handwriting from the series that we could find.
Yeah.
And we took all that to a handwriting expert who recreated the entire note in as close to Jeremy Brett's handwriting as possible. And so that's basically what you're going to be getting is going to be as if Jeremy had written this note. So it's quite an amazing thing.
There are a few characteristic Jeremy-isms in his handwriting that we tried to reproduce. So they're there if you look for them.
Right.
Then it will be mounted in a silver style 5x7 frame, similar to the one in Watson's office in the empty house.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could go on and on about this kit, but frankly, I think the photos will speak volumes more than we ever could say. And so check out our Twitter, check out our Facebook, check out our website. We'll have photos up. Our goal is to be able to ship the first batch of these in time for Christmas.
The production of the Napoleons is going to be what sets the pace of how fast we get these out.
Yeah.
And we're going to make them in batches. So we're going to release them in batches as well. And the plan is to have the first few batches out before Christmas.
So yeah, head over to our website at sherlockpodcast.com, where you'll find a link to our Shopify store where you can get on the pre-order list starting now.
Just one more housekeeping update. We can finally announce the film that we worked on with the legendary Werner Herzog is out. We actually got to go to the Toronto International Film Festival for the release of the movie, which is called The Theater of Thought. It premiered just a couple of weeks ago to an incredible response. There was even a review from the Hollywood Reporter, which called it one of Herzog's best.
Yeah, it's an interesting documentary about, well, it's hard to encapsulate what it is about. It's about our brains and our thoughts and the autonomy of our thoughts and how technology is coming that's going to change how we think about our thoughts. I mean, we traveled all over for this. We spent time in the IBM quantum computing labs. We spent time with the creators of Google AI, Facebook, Siri, with tech startups that are building helmets that can read your thoughts. We filmed an open brain surgery with a patient who was having tech implanted in his brain. What's coming is beyond anything people are prepared for, and this film just scratches the surface of it.
Yeah, but the cool thing about it is it sounds very techy and very, very heavy science. But if you've never seen a Werner Herzog movie, it is all of those things, but it's taken from the point of view of an artist. It's kind of Doyle like that, in that way.
It's also poetry. Yeah.
Yeah. There's all this science, but then there's these poetic, I always call them like poetic deviations to his movies.
Yeah.
It's a very entertaining documentary. There's a lot of laughs. There's so much in there. I can't wait for people to see it.
Yeah, the reviews are all calling it a very human look at our brains, so it's not a science documentary. It's definitely a Werner Herzog, very stylistic thing. Luke was the cinematographer on the film. I got a number of credits, as it turned out, but the truth is we both did just about everything, and it really was just a two-man crew for 95% of the film. So it was quite a thrill to see it on the big screen, especially since typically we tend to edit everything we do.
Yeah.
So this was like a unique experience for us since we had no input on the final cut, and we didn't know what to expect until we saw it on the big screen with the rest of the viewing public in Toronto. But it was great. Werner's a genius, and his editor is a pro, and it looked amazing. And it was just a real honor to work on it.
I remember the very first day of shooting, I remember thinking, this is a lot like a normal thing because we're just setting up an interview, but these two people are wearing brain helmets. But then right as we were filming, and I was thinking, when is it going to turn into a Herzog documentary? And he just went, can everybody just look into my face for a moment? Just calmly, please. And it's just... I was like, we're there right now.
Yeah. Well, the trailer is out there now, and we'll share it on our feeds, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The movie itself should be available on streaming platforms in the coming months. We aren't sure if it's getting a theatrical release or not. They're still working out those details, but once it's out and people have had a chance to see it, I don't know, maybe we'll talk about it again.
Definitely.
All right, well, let's check the mailbag for some listener telegrams. We've had quite a few responses to the Devil's Foot episode. The first of those comes from Peter, who writes, regarding the tune that Jeremy Brett was singing in the Devil's Foot, Luke, you mentioned the subtitles said it was Wagner.
Yeah.
Peter says, as soon as Jeremy started singing, I thought it must be the Liebestod from Tristan and Isolde. The piece, which in English means love death, comes at the end of the opera and is sung by Isolde over the dead body of her lover Tristan. I have attached a link to a performance of the Liebestod so that you can judge for yourselves if that's what Jeremy is actually singing. Well done on a tremendous series, Peter. Well, thank you, Peter. I actually have listened to a few renditions of this, but let's give it a quick listen and compare it to the moment in the show.
Okay.
And here's Jeremy singing the line,
We must arrange a date.
Yes, well, of course, gentlemen. Good day to you.
and here's the clip one more time.
We must arrange a date.
Yes, well, of course, gentlemen.
I think that first line definitely gives it away. Though I think the second line Jeremy sings, hard to say, but it could be from a different part of the piece. I just played the beginning here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think between the subtitles and Peter's note, I think we can call this mystery solved. I feel good about it. What do you think, Luke?
I think if we were more cultured, we would have caught it.
Yes. Well, thank you, Peter, for writing in. The next telegram is from Fredis, who writes, Gentlemen, thank you for another thoughtful and absorbing podcast.
You're welcome.
As a child in Northern Ireland in the 1960s, I took refuge in my Sherlock Holmes anthology and Doctor Who, in that order, so was intrigued when you mentioned that show's influence in the screenplay of The Devil's Foot. Television in my youth was dull and improving. At least what I was allowed to view was monstrously dull and improving. Going back to the medieval mystery plays, through Shakespeare and Marlowe, the stage was the UK's premier art form, and our TV retained that stagey quality for ages. Go look at the first season of Upstairs, Downstairs, or The Six Wives of Henry VIII, for examples. Doctor Who busted that mold, and as a young adult in the States, the homage to the Doctor's alternate realities was obvious when The Devil's Foot was finally broadcast here. But then I remembered all the hopelessly false beards and thought, maybe we haven't come all that far from the stage, really. Thanks again, and cheers. Signed, Fredies. Well, thank you, Fredies, for writing in. I'll tell you what's fascinating are all the connections to Doctor Who in the Sherlock show. I mean, I feel like we should start posting in the Doctor Who forums because those folks would probably also get something out of the Granada show.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just a digression here, but it's probably obvious from our comments that Luke and I have seen very little of the original Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
But for me anyway, it is one show that I look forward to finding the time to watch someday. I really think I'll enjoy the old stuff. I don't mind slight production values and campy sci-fi. I actually kind of like that kind of thing. So I have lots of friends who swear by Doctor Who. So someday at least, I plan to get caught up, and then we'll have a whole new fandom to get absorbed into.
Yeah, I always find it a little bit overwhelming just because there's so many episodes that it's like finding a classic band and then going and they only have 30 albums to listen to.
Where to
It's like,
begin? Yeah.
oh yeah, Frank Zappa comes to mind. ELO even, like I like ELO, but I so many albums I'm like I'm just gonna stick with what I know.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll get to it eventually.
Yeah.
We have another telegram from Elena about show locations, and she writes, "Hi there.
Hi.
I've been watching the podcasts both on your site and YouTube for a year now while drawing Granada Holmes fan art. So thank you for the company, the information, the behind-the-scenes trivia, and commentary you guys provide. I came for Stephen Fry's interview. I stayed for all the rest.
Excellent.
Since I will be visiting London soon, and I've already seen the elementary stuff, Baker Street, his statue, etc., I would like to ask you if you could recommend a guided tour that would rather focus on the filming locations. I understand that the Granada Studios tour in Manchester no longer exists, so I wonder if you could recommend a guided tour that would take visitors to outdoor locations like mansions, for example. Thank you very much for your time. Good luck with all of your projects, and keep up the good work. Elena." Well, thanks, Elena.
Very curious timing.
Yeah, I know. Well, I actually wrote back to Elena, but I thought her inquiry was an interesting one, and something we actually touched on a little in the trip report episode that we just released a few days back. But to answer the question for the rest of us, there's not, to my knowledge, any kind of guided tour, officially or otherwise, of the Granada Manchester locations anymore. Obviously, there once was a Granada Studios tour, but I don't know if there was ever an actual tour of other locations.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Haining's book, The Television Sherlock Holmes, has a few pages titled The Stately Homes, where he lists a lot of the locations, but it's not a complete list, as we found on our recent trip to England, and we talk about that in the Trip Report podcast. And there's also occasional errors in there, but it's a great starting place. There are a few lists out there on the internet, most of them quite outdated, and that doesn't mean the info is wrong, but none of these lists online really provide any exact directions or helpful GPS coordinates or anything. And as we shared in the trip report, these locations, they can be tricky to find sometimes.
Yeah.
Which is why we're thinking of doing something. And I know we already mentioned it in the last episode, but for those who didn't hear that, Luke, why don't you tell them what we're thinking of trying to do?
Yeah, well, for the exact reason she's describing, we wanted to launch like an interactive location guide. So you can come to London, you can come to Manchester, wherever you're going to be, and then at least you can find 2 or 3 or 4 of them to go look at.
Yeah.
Because what we found is trying to go find 6 or 7, it's impossible.
Yeah.
And it's just too much time. So if you're going to be in London, frankly, if you're going to be in London, I think what we would both say is check out Baddesley Clinton, which is a big mansion house, and it's the Musgrave Ritual. And then I would say go to the village called Stanton, which was basically the entire episode of The Last Vampire.
In the Cotswolds.
Which I know is not everybody's favorite episode.
Yeah.
But the town is amazing. And it's really nice to be able to just wander around in there and see all this cool stuff.
Yeah.
I think those 2 things, and they're both about 2 hours from London.
Yeah.
That's achievable. But if you want to go to Manchester, I think you should stay in Manchester.
Yeah.
And then take a couple of days to go look around. But we are going to try to launch this interactive database where you can look at a map and have GPS coordinates, because as we said on the last episode, you can go to one location and there's 2,000 acres to look through.
Yeah.
It's just overwhelming. And unless you have screenshots and things with you, it's tricky to see some of these things.
And we'll get to work on that. And again, anybody out there who'd like to contribute to that database, get in touch.
Get in touch. Hey everybody, Luke here. Just popping in for a quick update since we recorded this episode. We've had an incredible listener by the name of Steve Taylor reach out to us, and he's put together an amazing website which will become the database for the Granada filming locations. Once it's fully operational, we'll add the link to our website, sherlockpodcast.com, as well as our social media pages, and at that time, you'll be able to upload photos and tag the locations that you've visited in the past, and with the map feature, it should help people navigate the Sherlockian world that much easier. We'll show more on this as it develops, but for now, a big thank you to Steve, and back to Silver Blaze.
In the meantime, you can find a list at ihearofsherlock.com, which is useful. The article is called Experience Sherlock Holmes Shooting Locations Up Close. Also, if you check each location on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, by episode, there is usually shooting location data there, which you can plug into a map as a starting point, though it's often vague, so be warned. But I hope this helps. And as always, if anyone makes it out to any of these locations, as a number of our friends and listeners have, we're always happy to see and share any photos you snap in the wild.
And save that GPS data.
Regarding the Devil's Foot, we received a note on YouTube from a subscriber named 80s Forever, and they wrote, I'm in the opinion the reason why Holmes didn't pursue Sterndale was that the fewer people who knew about the poison, the better. To drag Sterndale to court would have exposed that dangerous poison to public knowledge. I was dying to listen to your coverage of The Devil's Foot, as that episode is in my top 5 Sherlock Holmes episodes. The little bit of interview with Kathy Gowers roused my interest, looking forward to that upcoming podcast too. I had a great time listening to your dissection of this marvelous episode. Thank you so much. Well, thanks, 80s Forever. Good theory about the poison getting too much exposure. As for the interview with Catherine Gowers, as we mentioned, we will be hearing more from her once we're able to assemble our musical tribute episode. But, well, let's just say that one is taking some time to complete, partially because we keep finding new people to interview, but also because we just have so much content for it at this point. It's just going to be a lot to it. It's actually looking like it might be a 2-parter at this point. Not sure, but we'll see. And we'll definitely be hearing more from not only Catherine, but other members of the Gowers family as well. So something to look forward to as soon as we can get it all assembled the best it can be.
I would say one thing about the exposure of the Devil's Foot, because I guess it would let people know of its existence, but they would have to go to Africa to find it.
True.
I mean, there's no Amazon back then. So
yeah,
I understand the sentiment, but I'm not sure that I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Or they'd have to go rob Sterndale.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't want to make more trouble for Sterndale. Yeah. Another YouTuber named Virgo Rising wrote a quick reply in response to David Stewart Davies telling us that Jeremy Brett was in the habit of sucking on lollipops to keep cool when they were shooting The Last Vampire, I think it was. The note reads, when David Stewart Davies says lollipops, he means ice lollies or popsicles to people in the U.S. So yeah, thanks to Virgo Rising for that. I actually didn't know that terminology, so that makes a lot more sense now that he'd be sucking on popsicles, not lollipops, as we would call them in the U.S., or suckers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did pick up on that, but even ice lollies, they don't call them that over here. It's popsicles. But yeah, good call.
Good call. The next telegram comes from John, who writes, Hello, Gus and Luke. I know this goes a way back, but I was watching The Dancing Men again last night and noticed a few things I hadn't previously. I think your show has got me analyzing the episodes in ways I hadn't before, which is a good thing, and has even added more enjoyment while watching them.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, be careful. In the beginning, when Elsie first sees the drawings, she runs back into the house, and her dress matches so well with the wallpaper that she sort of disappears into the corner, and I just thought how camouflaged she is. Probably not a planned thing with the wardrobe, but I found it a little humorous. Yeah, I always notice that. She's got like a flowery dress on, and the wallpaper is very flowery.
I thought I said that somewhere, but probably not that episode.
Yeah.
I thought I actually said it to Betsy Brantley, but maybe we didn't leave it in the interview. But yeah, but I agree with you.
Yeah, for sure.
But I remember that. I remember her sneaking backwards, and it's just like she's just disappearing into the wallpaper.
Yeah, enveloped in the darkness.
Good catch, though.
Yeah. Secondly, he says, the scene where Mr. Cubitt is in the bed just before he heads downstairs. I know it's a camera thing, but the bed is so ridiculously small when you consider the size of the house, the estate, etc. Yeah, but that's actually kind of, I'm cutting in again, but it's like that's actually kind of how they were back then. It's in spite of how lavish the house might have been, beds were so small. You can see some of them when you go to Baddesley Clinton or some of these other estate houses. They have the original beds, and they're tiny. It was just so much tinier back then. People were tinier back then, so
yeah,
that's how it was. The last thing I noticed that I am surprised I never noticed before is at the very end when the camera is panned out and you see the entire estate in the background, and you can see a truck driving down the road. I know the Six Napoleons is well known for the cars in the scene by the lamppost, but I had not heard about the truck in the background for this particular episode. Anyway, apologies for the lengthy email, but just wanted to point out a few things that I hadn't noticed before, and I credit it to your show and the level of detail that you both bring to these wonderful episodes. Many thanks, John. Well, many thanks to you, John. Well, yes, all fantastic observations. I don't know if I said it on that show, but I also noticed the cars in Dancing Men. Actually, a while ago, we spoke with Susie Reynolds, who's the owner of Leighton Hall, where Dancing Men was filmed. And I think I mentioned it to her that I saw it in the background. And what's funny is I don't think she had ever noticed it in all her viewings of the episode. So yeah, another interview that someday we'll share with you. But it's amazing how we tend not to see those things unless, you're super fans analyzing every frame. But
yeah,
good on you for being one of us.
I like that we're at least contributing, even if in some small way, to people's viewing mania.
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, I think we'll just do one more. And this one was actually a short note from a listener by the name of Anne. And she wrote in to say that the Christmas ghost story with David and Tom Burke, titled Number 13, is available on YouTube if anyone would like to watch it. And it's a fun watch. I recommend it. And I can also confirm, actually, that it's on BritBox as well, because that's where I watched it. They have all the M.R. James Christmas ghost stories on there. And they're all pretty much worth watching, so definitely suggest those.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I haven't actually watched it, so I will watch that.
Most of them have somebody from the Granada series in them.
Yeah.
As I recall. A lot of familiar faces there.
Speaking of familiar faces, this is a tangent, but I watched An American Werewolf in London the other day.
Yeah.
And I noticed Irene Adler's husband is in there. He's one of the victims. And the Lascar from The Man with the Twisted Lip.
Right, yeah.
He's one of the orderlies in the hospital. David Naughton is being cared for. Yeah, anyway, sorry, that was a little diversion, but you start seeing him everywhere.
Yeah, it's true. And yeah, I actually have a really soft spot for American Werewolf in London. And I don't know if we've told this story. We probably have. But one of our trips to Cambridge, we ended up in a little pub named the Hardwick Arms, actually. And we poked our head in there in the middle of the night, and the locals all just turned around and stared at us like, who are these strangers? And it was
you're right.
Very much like that scene in American Werewolf.
Yeah. No, you're right. That's a good point. Yeah.
We ended up making them all happy by ordering pizza from across town, and we shared the pizza with all the local patrons.
I feel like we must have told that story before, but
probably
anyways, yeah. But it's a good point. I didn't put the two things together with American Werewolf in London, so
yeah,
that's good.
Well, Anne also wrote in with a link to an old school fight expert who actually had some interesting things to say about the infamous fisticuff scene in our favorite episode, The Solitary Cyclist. And I thought we'd just play a little clip from his breakdown of that fight. The YouTuber's channel is English Martial Arts with no spaces. And here's a little clip of his breakdown of that fight sequence.
Holmes assumes his guard. It's a little bit stylized. It's a little higher than Donnelly demonstrates. Donnelly's is held relatively low. Palms facing up, one hand covering the mark, the other hand extended out. Holmes's is a little bit higher. Donnelly, again, doesn't have this circling movement that Holmes is using, but I can live with that. It's supposed to be showy. There's got to be a degree of playing to the camera going on here. The camera looks down at Holmes's feet, and he's got a very linear stance with his back foot almost pointing out a little bit too far, by my feeling, but that's exactly the stance as described in Donnelly. And he does a couple of little dancing steps, the crowd go, ooh! It shows that he's a skilled fighter. Pretty much every writer on boxing stresses how important footwork is, and when you get the footwork right, you're effectively in control of the fight. And that's exactly what Holmes is demonstrating here. I take issue a little bit with his showing off his footwork, considering he's wearing leather-soled shoes on sawdust on a solid floor. He's likely to fall over if he's a bit too cocky. But we've shown now that not only is he cool and calm and collected, and a gentleman, but he's also very scientific in his approach to boxing.
So yeah, he goes on for about 15 minutes dissecting it blow by blow and comparing it to the classic Ned Donnelly style of boxing. Donnelly actually wrote the famous book, The Art of Boxing, back in the 1800s. But I thought it was a fun little examination from someone who is pretty passionate about old-timey boxing techniques. And
yeah,
I don't know, I thought it was neat. If you're interested in that kind of thing, well, maybe we'll post a link as an artifact.
Yeah, we'll put it up. And I think what it tells you is, as we suggested, it's all in the fancy footwork.
Exactly. And Jeremy Brett had that in spades.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been a busy couple of months, lots on the horizon, but keep an eye on our Facebook and our Twitter for updates on the movie, updates on the relics, and everything Granada Sherlock Holmes related.
And get out to those locations already.
Yeah, and send us your photos. We'd love to share them.
Definitely.
Thanks, Luke. And a very special thanks to David John and Sally Faulkner for sharing their stories. As always, please do find us on YouTube, on Facebook, and on the web at twitter.com/SherlockPod. And please send any thoughts and feedback to contact@SherlockPodcast.com. We've had quite a few new iTunes reviews in the past few weeks, so thank you for those. They really do help to get the word out on the show. And as always, a very special thanks to our Patreon patrons. We really couldn't do this show without you. And if you are not a patron and would like to support us there, you can find us at patreon.com/SherlockPodcast, where you'll also find our archive of extended interviews, deleted scenes, and more. The next story is yet another great one, though sometimes divisive among fans. I hope you'll join us next time as we adventure into Wisteria Lodge. See you then.